Welcome, everybody. Bobby Amari here for the Power Connection Chat. I'm here with Fatima Zaidi, founder of Quill. Good
Hi,
morning.
everyone. Great
I'm
to
very,
be connected virtually.
yes, I'm very excited to have her here today because we're going to talk about why you should start a podcast. And what's interesting about this is that I recently went to a talk by her on why start a podcast. I was like, man, I should start a podcast. And it just made me want to do a podcast, even though for years I've resisted. And it was a really compelling presentation. She started a company that supports podcasts. Her content was phenomenal. So, I've known Fatima for a long time. So, for years we've been friends, colleagues, fellow speakers. She's a powerful, strong, passionate businesswoman that kind of inspires me in her hustle and drive. We work together on DYP, Discover Personal Brand. She's spoken at some of our events, whether it's empowering women or diversity inclusion. So that's been great. So if you're just joining us today, again, this is the Power Connection broadcast. I'm here not every morning, but most mornings, Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 8:45 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, talking about topics around leadership, personal branding, speaking, employee engagement, and people. And so I try to bring people in as with more interviews. And actually, I've already booked a whole bunch, which is great. Now, if you're joining us, make sure you engage. What we really want is people to engage. And so if you look at the actual content in terms of what the post is saying, it's saying, look, here's the topic, here's what you want to do. Tell us where you're from. Are you from North America, South America, Africa, Asia, Australia, Europe? What are your questions around podcasts so that the team can answer for them for you? And of course, just listen and engage and see what the content is. You can engage people that are on the feed. Send a quick hello, tag people, share us on your own page. There's lots of stuff you can do to build a community. There's already people here. Joseph tuning in from Singapore, Andrew from Chicago, Sanjay Kumar from Toronto, and people already engaging. If you like what you're hearing, okay, you like, love, heart, light bulb, and smiley face, all that kind of stuff, which is great. So, yeah, keep doing that, which is great. So let's get right into it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Fatima a few questions, and then she'll also share some really amazing nuggets from her actual presentation. So today, for the first time, we're going to actually be sharing slides. So let me know what you think, because I've never done this before, so I'm very excited about that. But why don't we start with, Fatima, tell us a bit about yourself, and then maybe where this idea came from to start focusing on podcasts.
Yeah, first off, thank you so much for that lovely, wonderful introduction. We go way back, and so it's really great to, still get to work with you in some capacity. I've been telling you for years that I think you should start a podcast. I think you'd be really good at it. You're like the prime demographic of someone who should be a host. And really, I'm just very passionate about this space. I used to lead sales for an agency for the last few years. And one of the biggest requests we were getting were, how do we acquire more customers? How do we reach more millennial demographics? And how do we typically, build more thought leadership and credibility with our customers? And I, had started really becoming very passionate about the podcasting space. First off, as a consumer, I listen to maybe 10 shows a week. I don't watch TV that much. I don't listen to music, but I do listen to podcasts all the time. And I just found that I was such an engaged listener. And I was also making a lot of purchases after listening to ads. If a host that I'm listening to recommends a product or a service, I've built this relationship with this host after listening to a podcast for so many months or weeks or years, and I trust their product recommendations. So when they tell me to buy the Bombay hair curler, I'm buying the Bombay hair curler. And so I really started looking into this industry a little bit deeper, and I realized there were a lot of pain points. I think a lot of people, one, don't realize how engaged the community is and how high the conversion rates are. Definitely companies are starting to realize, and they're moving aggressively into this space, which is why we have so much growth now. But I would say that people don't usually know where to start, and budgets are also limited. So, if people can't afford to pay massive markup agency fees, how are they supposed to start a podcast if they don't have thousands of dispensable dollars? And so that's why I created my company Quill, which is the world's first marketplace that connects podcasters with freelance services at whatever budget that they can afford. So if you only have a couple $100s, we will sell you a DIY manual, step-by-step guide on everything you need to do in order to create a podcast. It's just a couple $100 and you can literally do it all yourself. And similarly, if you don't have the bandwidth to do it yourself, we can do full service packages or even a hybrid approach where you're like, okay, I just need an audio editor, or I just need a producer, or I just need support with recording. So you can sort of outsource elements of it, and we have ranges of different budgets. Everybody on our platform who is a freelancer is vetted by us. Very, very long vetting process. So everyone has a lot of experience in the podcasting industry. And the whole goal of starting this company was to make podcasting accessible for everyone, whether you're the Fortune 500 company that has $10,000 an episode to drop, to that indie podcaster recording from their basement who may only have a couple of $100s to spare. So that was really the impetus of starting Quill. I wanted everyone to get into this medium, enjoy it, and love it the same way that I do. And yeah, we are now also doing a conference in the summer in LA, where we're bringing together a lot of brands to talk about what the best practices are for creating branded podcasts. So podcast for your company. And our headliner is Sarah Koenig. So if any of you have listened to Serial, she is the investigative journalist who hosted and produced Serial, and she's going to be coming out to talk about how she made podcasting viral. So we're very excited about that.
That's awesome. And already there's tons of people joining us. Amber Mack is joined in here and saying hello.
Hello.
I know Zishan says hello. Christine Cruz from my brand marketing day says hello. Wow. Zishan saying, Bobby, start that podcast. Okay, thanks, Zishan. Appreciate that. He was at DYPB a couple years ago too. Matt Crump is here saying hello. Wow, a lot of people. Joshua Miller, Imdad from Dubai. Josh says, I think people should do their homework before starting a podcast. Everyone has one. The market is flooded. Oh, that's interesting. That's what he says.
We'll talk about
like any social media channel platform, the competition is fierce. And if you aren't clear on why you are starting, you'll find yourself with a small audience. Podcasting is the new blogging. If you know who you are, why you're doing it, and what you want, you have a greater chance of success. Well, that's interesting. So, already people have, they're sharing their expertise on podcasts and what they know. Now, you're a podcast expert, so, why don't we dig into some of the stuff you want to share with us about podcasting and why people should start?
Yeah, and I do actually want to make a point.
Yeah, please.
Was that Zishan who left that comment? Or
who? That was Joshua Miller.
Joshua Miller. Okay, so Joshua makes a really good point. I think while I may disagree that the market probably isn't as saturated as we think, and I'm going to share some stats in a bit where we can highlight, what are the stats compared to blogs and websites and YouTube channels. But I will say that I do agree with Joshua that a lot of people are starting podcasts as a lifestyle hobby, and they'll, record on their phone, and it's like a very casual thing that they're not looking to monetize on, and they're not looking to build a full-time brand. So if that's your goal and you just want to have a really good time with your guests and your audience, and you don't want to make this a polished professional show, that's completely fine. But oftentimes I find that, a lot of customers that we're working with at Quill, they're the indie podcasters who maybe started off like that, and then they invested a little bit into working with some experts to really polish up their content or their audio editing, and they've seen a world of a difference. So that's my other point. You can invest very little into taking your podcast to the next level. So you maybe had just started the medium just to test it out and see if it was something that worked for you. But once you do realize that it's something you enjoy and you want to take it to the next level, I highly recommend hiring some sort of an audio editor for $25 an hour to just clean up your audio production quality to make it top notch, or even just, having an expert do an audit of your content and seeing if there's ways that you can really tighten up your episodes. Right. So really great point by him. I do agree that I think a lot of people are just starting it as a lifestyle thing, whereas I think if you really invest from the beginning, you can get a lot more eyeballs on your show.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think just like with any sort of content, from what I know a lot of people have podcasts, but not to the same extent that I've seen people everyone has a YouTube channel. Everyone has a blog site. So I think that podcasts are still really up and coming, and they're still really hot, and it's an opportunity. It's similar to it reminds me of actually LinkedIn. A lot of people say LinkedIn, everyone's doing videos on LinkedIn, and it's yeah, it may seem that way, but if you look at the data, only 1% of LinkedIn active users create content. And of that 1%, another 1% only create videos. So we're talking about a small number. We're talking 3 million people, but still, not 3. 3 million is the 1% of content. Of that, there's 30,000 people doing videos. That's nothing.
It's
compared to 600 million people on LinkedIn. So like, it may seem like a lot, but that's because now they're everywhere. But eventually, like you can be a part of this too. So
well, and also, Bobby, I don't actually think podcasters have competition in the conventional sense. I think that podcast hosts attract their own tribes and their own audiences, and their audiences can look very different. So just to give you an example, this industry is not about, it used to be, but it's not anymore. It's not about the number of downloads and listens and people per episode. It's about how niche is your demographic, how much analytics do you have around your demographic, so do you know exactly who your audience is, and how engaged are they? That is the number one question that brands want to know now if they're thinking about investing in advertising or sponsoring your show. I think gone are the days where people cared about mass advertising and mass numbers. If you're not converting those numbers, or if that audience isn't engaged, then who cares? So it's better to have 1,000 listeners per episode that are very engaged and following you and really enjoy your content versus 5,000 people per episode who, really aren't engaged and really aren't converting and, are very mass demographic audience where you can't really tailor down who it is that you're representing.
Yeah, and that's a very common strategy across all forms of social media. Like in terms of Twitter followers, LinkedIn followers, your email list, you want to have the quality people. 500 people can make more of an impact than 50,000. So that's great insight. And other people already, like Josh was saying, love your show, brother Bobby. Josh also hashtag Jared Nichols, who I also know as someone who does podcasts. So hopefully he joins this thing. Sajid Kumar already has a question. What topics do we decide? Now, I'm here with Fatima Zaidi, founder of Quill, supporting podcasts and why start a podcast. And she's going to share some more great insights with some really cool slides for you. So throw your questions in the feed, and we'll actually answer the questions, no problem. People already have some great comments here too, which is fantastic. But I think I want to get you into share some more content.
Yeah. And that was a really great question. So I do want to answer, but it's going to be answered in my slide deck.
Exactly. So
right away.
Yeah. So Fatima's going to share her screen, and you guys will be able to see the slides, and then we can and she can cover that with you, which would be great. So this is the first time ever on the Power Connection chat to share slides. So I'm hoping. Oh, here we go. Yes.
Great. Okay. So Bobby, can you see my presentation? Okay.
Yeah. If you want to max it out, that'll be better.
Okay. Let me do that. Great. Is this better?
There it is. Perfect. That's great.
Fabulous. Okay. So first off, I want to get into the numbers a little bit. So, we know there's 800,000 podcasts. And, I don't know if people know this, but there's about 3,000 to 4,000 new shows popping up every week. So people have really started to adopt this medium in the last few years. I think there's been an exponential surge and rise. And it's really interesting, but 22% of the US population now listen to podcasts. I don't necessarily have a Canadian stat. It's probably a little bit higher than that, just given the sheer size of our population. But 22% for the US population is a lot, and they're consuming on average of 7 podcasts a week. And the other thing, a little fun fact, South Korea leads the world in podcast popularity with nearly 2/3 of South Koreans listening to podcasts.
Wow.
I know. Isn't that very cool? That's something that
did you say 2/3?
2/3 of the people are listening to podcasts.
Okay. That's a lot.
It is a lot. So another thing to remember is even though only 800,000 podcasts exist, only 18% of them are active. Active means that people are continuously producing new episodes. So I know somebody had said in the question feed that it is a very, very saturated market. Well, 18% of 800,000 is around 145,000. So it's actually not that much that you're competing with. Secondly, I have to say here that the podcasting community is extremely engaged. In fact, Edison recently did a study showing that 93% of podcasters who start a show end up listening to most or all of the episodes, which is pretty incredible when you're looking at other forms of content, whether it be print or digital. The drop-off rates are much higher, whereas here we're looking at 92% of people who are dialing in are finishing the content. And most importantly, the demographic that you're reaching through podcasting is affluent, educated millennial professionals. 75% of the workforce are now millennials who have purchasing power, make purchasing decisions. And so it's pretty incredible that is like, those are the people that you're directly reaching through podcasting, which is why brands that market to millennials are moving aggressively into this space.
I'm sorry, let me cut you off for a second. So why are they so loyal when they join? Like you said that they join and they're quite loyal to sticking around for the rest. So why is that? What's driving that?
Yeah, you know what? I think it's because the nature of podcasting is so intimate. Because there's so many podcasts and different genres out there, people really only tune into shows that are really going to fit the demographic or genres that they're interested in. So say you're interested in murder mystery. There are some incredible podcasts around the murder mystery circuit. So typically, if you start a show because it's really content that you can resonate with, you end up listening to most of the show. Also, another thing to keep in mind is people end up developing a relationship with these hosts because podcasting is so intimate. And so eventually, over time, I mean, it may be a one-sided relationship, but these hosts become influencers. And so more often than not, if you're tuning into a podcast, it's either because you really connect with the content, it's something that you're really interested in or you're really passionate about, or you've built this relationship with the host and you really enjoy listening to them.
No, that's good insight. All right, continue. This is great. This is great information. And people are throwing questions, but again, let's hear more from you and what you want to share about podcasts.
Yeah, and just a little fun fact, I often get asked this question: why like where did the term podcasts come from? It was actually inspired by the iPod. So iPod was like a form of consuming content before in our previous generation, and the new generation, it is called podcasting.
Yeah, so. Gen Z's like, what's an iPod? I don't get it.
An iPod is one of those little nano devices that we used to use to listen to music. You remember, you used to stick your headphones in, and it was like different colors. And I don't, to be honest, it was very early on in my. I think the last time I owned an iPod was probably 15 years ago. Bobby, do you remember iPods?
Oh, yeah, no, I remember them. Yeah.
All right. So I always get asked this question too. It's why should you care? Why should you start a podcast? Bobby, I've been harping, at you for months now. I think you really should start a podcast for these reasons. First, you are doing such a great job with live streaming and you have such a great following on so many different channels, but podcasting is a really great way of increasing and building your listener base if you have really great content to share, which I know you do. So it's great to have, incredible followers on YouTube and LinkedIn and Twitter for you. I know LinkedIn and Twitter is pretty big, but what about those people who aren't big on social media or aren't big on LinkedIn scrolling or Twitter? Maybe they prefer consuming audio over video content. And I'm one of those people. I don't get to catch enough of your live streams just because I'm not somebody who is great on visual content, but I love listening to audio content, especially when I'm driving, especially when I'm, commuting to work. And those, that's the beauty of podcasts. It allows you to be productive when you're busy and you're doing things like household chores and commuting. And so if I could listen to your live streams while I was, washing the dishes, it would just allow me to be really productive. And so think about that as like one of your mediums of connecting with people that you've already built a relationship with. It's allowing you to become a further thought leader and subject matter expert on an area of your choice. You can attract advertisers. So sometimes the long-term goal for people is to monetize on their shows, and you can easily do that. I would say if you can really invest in your podcast from day one, if you can create really good content, if you have your analytics down to a T, I think that the long-term goal should always be to monetize on your show, especially if you feel like you can get conversions for your sponsors. And then elevate your brand values with a younger audience. So, we all know millennials are starting to monopolize in the workspace, purchasing power, decision makers. No offense to the baby boomers, but, Gen Z and millennials are sorely starting to climb up, and you really have to move with the trends. And the trends have spoken that the younger audiences do prefer bite-sized nuggets of content when they're commuting, when they're doing household chores. And so you really want to tap into this audience of, like I said earlier, affluent, educated millennial professionals. So those are just a few reasons why I think you should start a podcast. But the main one is, to build your personal brand and use it as an avenue to build more relationships, to do lead gen, to get in front of people that you consider to be influential or people that you think have a lot of value to add, especially if you're doing an interview style podcast.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Do you want to get to some of the questions and then we can continue?
Sure. So some questions. So there's a couple now. So there's actually three. So Sajid Kumar is asking, what topics do we decide? And then once you start with that, then I'll do the other two. But that's the first question was on the topics.
Yeah, so great question. If you peruse through iTunes, you'll see that practically no topic is too niche for podcasting. There's basically a topic for everything now. So my goal is, my suggestion is always research what's out there and see if what you're looking to talk about is already covered. And most likely than not, it probably is covered. And then conversely, if it isn't been covered, is it because there's, no one's thought of it, or is it because there's not enough of a natural audience for the content? Because you do want to make sure whatever you're talking about has a natural community or fandom. More often than not, you're not going to be the first to market with an idea. So I always say you should fall under one of three categories. You either need to be the best first podcast, you need to be the best podcast, or you need to be different. The first, right. Best, or different. If you can fall into one of those three categories, you're great. And like I mentioned earlier, Bobby, are you a fan of the show The Office?
Sure.
I love The Office. It's one of my favorite shows. And so many times I've thought about creating a fan show around The Office and doing a podcast around it. But a quick Google search showed me that Angela Kinsey and Jenna Fischer, who are two of the main actresses from the show, have already created a podcast covering behind the scenes episode scoop. And so more often than not, when people are Googling or researching a podcast around The Office or even the comedic space, that's going to be the show that comes up, and that's going to be what they listen to. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't start a topic just because there's competition, but you want to approach the content in a different angle and find the missing niche within that category that you're interested in.
And sorry, quick thing. Can you, you're still sharing your screen, so are you going back to just you, or what are you trying to do? Just want to make sure.
Sorry, I didn't realize. I'm going to go back to my slides.
Okay, go website. Yeah, because what happens is when they see that interface, some people are leaving. So I want to make sure that they see that there's still great content here. So,
okay.
And I've changed the layout so it's larger your screen, so you can see the content, which is great. What's interesting is that you're talking about people doing podcasts or fan podcasts of other shows. It might be funny to see the first podcast that's about a fan of another podcast. So it's like, hey, we're fans of this podcast. Let's do a podcast about that. Someday, you never know.
Yeah, so, you never know. So I think one of the other questions, sorry, I was just going to say that someone did ask a question earlier about there being too many podcasts out there, right? And I really did want to take some time to address that question because I do think that's a pretty big misconception that's out there.
Okay.
So here are a fraction of the podcasts that are available. Here are a fraction of the podcasts that are available on iTunes, but it still feels like an overwhelming amount of options to choose from. But I always say to people, let's compare the numbers. So how many people live streaming today have a personal website? Well, you guys are competing with 1.5 billion websites. Now, I know it's not apples to apples because some websites are company websites and for commercial uses or e-commerce, but still there's 1.5 billion websites out there. If you have a personal blog, there's 600 plus million blogs out there with 4.4 million posts being uploaded every day. If you have a YouTube channel, there's 31 million YouTube channels with about 500 hours of content being uploaded every minute. In fact, people Google how to start a blog or how to start a YouTube channel 121,000 times monthly worldwide. So now when we take a look at the podcasting numbers, it actually isn't a lot. It's 800,000 podcasts, of which only 18% of them are active. So really, there's only 145,000 podcasts that you're competing with. If we're comparing those numbers to blogs, websites, and YouTube channels, we have a long way to go before we can ever become saturated. It's still a very new category, and the people who are starting podcasts now are essentially the first to market. So, just like I have a friend who was one of the first 10 people who was on Twitter in Canada, and just by virtue of that, she has an insane number of Twitter followers because she was one of the first people on Twitter. Similarly, if you're going to be one of the first people to start podcasts, and definitely today it's a very early category, think about how popular this medium is going to be in 5 years compared to how popular social media is now compared to 2007. And you, by virtue of being first to market, are going to have a lot more followers than people who catch on to this trend in 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, fair point. Okay. Can I get the next question?
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to bring you back to my beautiful face.
Oh, excellent. So the next question is from Matt Crump, and he basically says, I know so many people with podcasts and most don't monetize yet they have good engagement, but wouldn't mind making money for sure. What are some tips for quality shows wanting to monetize amidst all the ads out there to take money to supposedly make you money?
Yeah, so great question. You know what? There's actually, it's interesting. There's a company that just launched Podcorn, and they actually help people monetize on their shows. And it isn't about the number of listeners that you have anymore. It's about can we match you with a company that is directly trying to market to your audience? I think is just such a smart business idea. It's such a great resource and a huge pain point for podcasters, because the number one question is, well, how do we find brands? The other thing I would say is, make sure any brand that's going to invest in your podcast wants to invest in a very professional, polished podcast. So make sure you have a website with like a clear play button. It'll help you distribute your content, but also it's a way for you to really engage with your listeners, and the content will get indexed by Google. Make sure that you have, if you're trying to monetize on your show, that you have a separate deck where you can share with companies that clearly outlines your analytics, your numbers, your metrics, who it is that is tuning in, what your conversion rates are. And if you've never ever tested conversion rates, it's fine to do like a 2 to 3 month test pilot. Quill is releasing a white paper with our partners at Origins House. We're releasing a white paper on sponsorships and monetizing. So stay tuned for that. I'll make sure to share it with Bobby so he can share it with his audience. But these are the questions that we're answering. Like, how do you get in front of brands? What metrics matter? How much should you be charging brands based on how many listeners you have? And I think it all comes down to acquisition. And sometimes you can't know until you do a test period. So I always recommend doing a 2 to 3 month pilot where brands definitely pay you maybe a smaller amount to see what those conversions and click-throughs can look like before they actually do a massive spend. And really, it's just a matter of really knowing who your audience is and doing your research on which companies are really trying to market to that audience. So for example, if you have a podcast that's local to Toronto and you have a really engaged group of listeners and they're all millennials, then I know for a fact right off the bat, HelloFresh would be the perfect audience for you. Your audience would be perfect for HelloFresh because and Fedora as well, the food delivery app, because they're always looking to target people locally, geographically, and millennials is their prime target audience. So I'm sure, and HelloFresh is they invest a lot of money into advertising on podcasts. It's one of their most lucrative streams. So that's general knowledge for me. I'm sure if you did a quick Google search, you could find other brands that are looking to advertise on podcasts. Otherwise, check out Podcorn. They do a really good job of connecting brands with podcasts, despite the number of listeners you have, where I know a lot of the podcasting networks like the Podcast Exchange do the same thing, but they only care if you have a certain number of listeners, whereas Podcorn doesn't.
So thanks for that. And we're here talking with Fatima Zaidi, founder of Quill, which supports podcasts, new or old or big or small. And one of the things that she's doing really well here is answering questions on why you should start a podcast. And I think and then if you have other questions, you can ask them in the feed below, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. She's sharing some great content from a really great presentation that I saw answering asking lots of questions. I'll actually share a bit about why I don't have a podcast. And I know you're convincing me to do one, but one of the things that for me it's doing content is a big investment, and I'm a big content guy, and I do videos, and between Instagram lives and Twitter feeds and videos on LinkedIn and Facebook lives and all that kind of stuff, it became exhausting, and so I kind of scaled back things. But what I also think is now that I'm doing a live stream broadcast, it's very similar to podcasting. The difference is video. So one of the things I'm thinking about is taking the live stream I'm doing, this Power Connection broadcast, and turning it into a podcast that's audio as well. And that way I can maybe reach people more, maybe through Anchor or one of those other platforms. So that's something I could do. Just haven't put that together yet. But that's kind of where I'm at right now, because right now I'm still finding a groove with even the live stream, because originally I was doing it every day and it was exhausting. And then I went down to 3 days a week, and now I do it whenever I have stuff booked. And it's pretty much looking like Mondays and Fridays are the main days I'm doing stuff, but not always. So it's pretty casual. I'm not committing to it. Whereas podcast, you have to commit like every week or pretty much or you record them all at once and post it out every week, right? So that's kind of where I'm at right now. But I definitely see the importance of podcasts. So I want to promote you and podcasts for people out there, because I think it's really important. And I also think, because of me, one of the things I do is I run a speaker mastermind program where I help speakers build thought leadership brands right from speaking. And so one of the avenues is for them to create content. And so if they want to start a podcast, I definitely am going to work on that. So so promoting podcasts and telling them to get to work with you and get out there, yeah, I'll definitely be promoting that big time. So that's kind of my perspective on where I'm at.
Yeah, that's amazing. And Bobby, when you do decide to start one, because I'm sure you will one day, I want you to come work with us. You have to come work with us. We have to do your first podcast.
Okay. And so some great questions here again. Fiona Bryant saying, do I understand you're in Toronto? Yeah, actually, we are both in Toronto, Canada, home of the Championship Raptors. So there you go. That's nice.
Well, I'm currently in Toronto, but I'm sort of most of my customers are in the U.S., so I go back and forth between Chicago, California, and Toronto. But definitely a Canadian company.
But her work is global, as is mine. So I totally get it. Yeah, it is.
Podcasting is a global thing.
Exactly. Now, guys, if you have questions, please add them below or tag people join the conversation. There's another question from Fiona. Is there a stat on the most listened to length of podcast episode?
You know what? That's a really great question. I would say in terms of duration and format, it really depends on the content, the topic, the genre. I would say the average is around 30 to 40 minutes, but I have worked with a lot of podcasters and companies where, the 10-minute episodes are like great forms of nugget content, or even the 20-minute episodes. We're actually doing a podcast for ourselves. We're going to be doing it for the Listen In conference that we're hosting in California. And I'm actually looking at a 10-minute format. Just each speaker comes in, shares 10 minutes of their words of wisdom, and then we bounce to the next one. And sometimes the 10-minute slots are really great, because if you have a short commute, you can still listen to a podcast. So it really depends on the genre that if you're starting a murder mystery or an investigative journalism type podcast, then 10 minutes is obviously not going to work. Sometimes those need to be an hour long to get through each story and tell your story in a very narrative, constructive way. But I would say that's it's so contingent on whatever it is that you're going to talk about.
And I think that's a good point. I think the data, we need more data to figure this stuff out, because the truth is, if podcasts are getting great traction because of their intimacy, then I think it's probably better to go longer to create that intimacy, as opposed to just being an info share. And one of the things I can also tell you from even doing live streams is that, like right now, when we started, there was about 20, 30 people listening in our broadcast. But usually around 30 minutes in, it starts to increase. And it usually doubles by the time you're at 45 minutes to an hour. But again, if you go over an hour, that's too much. It's too much, and people don't like that. So it's interesting to see how the data goes. But I think creating the intimacies, as you mentioned, is really, really important. So it'll be interesting to see how that works.
Yeah, there's a podcast that I listen to. It's called What the Peeve, and they discuss their biggest pet peeves, and that's like a shorter duration content, and it's hysterical. This podcast is so much fun, and I think the 10-minute short snippets really works, because you don't really want to talk about a peeve for more than 10 minutes. So
right, that's a good point.
Very contingent on the topic.
Yeah, the topic. Yeah, exactly. It's It's not good. We're going to talk about pencils. Let's dive in for an hour and a half. Like, we're not going to do that. So I totally get that. More questions here. Actually, Fiona just said, thinking of Alexa Flash briefing, keeping things doable while working in full-time practice. Okay, that's good. That's good. And another question from Jeremy. Do you suggest to customers that want to podcast or record video as well?
Yeah, definitely. So video engagement. So actually Headliner did an experiment recently where they promoted a podcast on Facebook with a static image. And then they did the same thing with an audiogram, which is essentially a video. It combines visual art with some sort of a video and a transcription of the dialogue. So it's called a video. And they found that the audiogram actually had 5 times more engagement than the static post. So definitely, if you can get to a point where you can invest a little bit of money into your podcast to make it grow, video engagement is always higher than a static post. And so there's a company called Headliner that I love to use for my clients and customers. They're very cheap. You can convert a lot of your audio snippets into like videos and audiograms, which generally, do drive more engagement. A lot of our clients also like to do video teasers. So while they're recording, we'll take like videos of them, and we'll use that for promotional reasons as well. And then you can also do trailers. Audio trailers work great, but you can also do a video trailer to announce that your show is coming, a new season is coming, or even just an intro trailer that succinctly describes what your show is about. People will use that trailer to decide whether or not they want to subscribe to your show. So video engagement is always king.
I have a question too, which is I've noticed that some of the people. So one of the things is, even though I don't do a podcast, I've actually go on mini podcasts. So I've been on now over 100 podcasts as a guest, and so it's great because they put it out there and distribute my message, but I also get to share it as content for myself, and which has been great. So I've been in some good podcasts like The Art of Charm and things like that, which is great. But one thing I've noticed is that a lot of them have their podcast featured on many different, like iTunes and another place. What's the balance in terms of where you want to put this thing and put your podcast?
Everywhere. If you have a show, it's up to you to make your show discoverable, which is one of the things that we do for people. We set them up on their distribution. Oh my God, it's one of my biggest peeves when people come to me with a podcast and they're only on iTunes or they're only on Spotify. You're really doing a disservice to yourself, because the most popular listening app is Apple Podcasts. 58% of downloads worldwide are on Apple Podcasts, but people listen to podcasts in many different ways. Some use Spotify, some use iTunes, some use Stitcher. And so I think it's really important that when you're doing distribution, you're setting yourself up on all of those platforms. So you're not leaving listeners on the table because they can't find your show. So distribution is very important as analytics, I would say. So when that's one of the services we offer. It's super easy for us, and we can easily set you up on your distribution to make sure you're everywhere and we can get the most eyeballs on your show. Another request that we get often is people who have podcasts and they want to increase their number of listeners. I would say that's probably our biggest request.
Really? Okay, interesting. And another question from Jeremy. How many episodes do you suggest to have in the can before you start posting episodes?
Yeah, so the first season should be on average, I would say between 7 and 9 episodes is usually one season. And so I would say try to bulk drop at least half of them to test to see how your format is being responded to. Once you've produced more than 10 episodes, you can actually start deriving insights and drawing comparisons. So do your listeners prefer a certain format? Do your listeners prefer a particular topic and different styles? So your first season is all about experimenting to see what works and what doesn't work. But I would say no more than 7 to 8 episodes for your first season. Wrap up your season. Make sure you tell your listeners that you'll have another season coming soon, and then use that gap between season 1 and season 2 to really hone your content, make it better, polish your brand, so that when you launch season 2, it's even better.
I like how you turn them into seasons. That's a really good idea. I mean, for the most part, and season doesn't have to be like, you don't have to wait an entire year. Like, season 1 could be the spring, and season 2 could be the fall, or
it could be a month later. It could literally just give yourself a little bit of a break so that you can really do a deep dive into what season 1 was like, how you can make it better, how you can refine content. It's like when you're doing marketing campaigns, you want to space them out so that you can collect data and use that data to further customize and tailor your content.
Yeah, that's so true. I think that's great. Now, is there any other content that you want to share with us before we kind of close off, or is there, like I'm happy to give you the opportunity to share more of your insights into podcasts, and I still have a few more questions for you, but I kind of want to see where you're at now.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? I love talking podcasts all day, every day. I could talk for the next 2 hours and still probably have more content to share. So it's probably fine to wrap this up. If you are listening and you have a podcast or you want to start one and you just want to shoot me a note because you have some questions, or you can visit my website. We do all full services. And we also just if you just want to know how to increase your listeners, we do strategies, we do audits. And I'm also just here for advice. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out, visit my website, quillit.io. I think, Bobby, you put the URL in the body of the webinar as well. Yeah. Perfect. And if you are a company that is thinking about getting into podcasting, or you have one and you don't know how to grow your show, you probably would be a good candidate to come out to our LA conference in June. So consider doing that. And otherwise, thanks for listening, everyone, and happy podcasting.
That's awesome. Well, listen, everybody, thanks so much for joining us. If you have questions, you can also just put questions below in the feed, tag the team or myself, and she and I will do our best to answer those questions. You can continue to watch the replay after it's done. It'll be on my feed, so you can watch it afterward. It's totally fine. And I do the Power Connection broadcast Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 8:45 a.m. I have one coming up on Friday, doing another interview with a really awesome speaker down in the U.S. And I'm doing some more coming up in the future, so I'm very excited about that. And Fatima, thank you for your time. There's tons of people joining on now, which is great, but we will end it now and just say podcasts are definitely a huge opportunity. It's not flooded, a huge opportunity. Very few people are doing it. Very few are doing it well. If you want to do it well, then take the insights from this broadcast today, as well as what Fatima can offer, and hopefully you guys can take them to the next level. All right. So thanks everyone for your time. Thank you, Fatima, and we'll have yourself a wonderful week. Take care.
Bobby, have a great week.